Are there any requirements now? I know you said it's really gratifying, at least in Europe, that most of these drugs, you've used how many doses already, and you really have not seen any adverse effects over and above what you would have seen with the originator. Are there in the US, any pharmacovigilance requirements, safety requirements that the manufacturers have to do at this point?
So there are not mandatory requirements that I'm aware of, but I strongly encourage all the manufacturers to consider some sort of real-world evidence studies, because physicians, we are always skeptic of adopting a new line of treatment or new class of drugs. So I've requested most of the manufacturers to proactively reach out to physicians and say if they have interest in doing either phase 4 studies or some sort of real-world evidence data collection. Either you can look at the drug registry or a disease registry to ensure that one is the physician who uses them feels comfortable, and that you have data to support 2 years from now that you are like guru for the breast cancer. So maybe you could actually inspire the manufacturer to say, we want to do real-world evidence studies, and would you be supportive of doing it in trastuzumab in the adjuvant setting?
Correct. Well, I'll tell you what's really interesting. I mean, I'll give a plug for real-world evidence. We really, with Pfizer and palbociclib, have generated a lot of really neat real-world evidence in first-line therapy with palbociclib and an aromatase inhibitor. You're looking at overall survival. The trials even haven't estimated yet. We're about to present this at a major meeting. And the thing is that we got that out of the Flatiron database. You're probably familiar with Flatiron database.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
We have these large databases now with over 2 million, 3 million patients, that span now 5 or 6 years. And if you do it right, if you do the analysis correctly and you use all the correct statistical kind of, adjustments, and adjustments for like the various kind of, the comorbidities of the patients, et cetera, and it's called a propensity score. You adjust it properly, you can actually generate a lot of really good data. And it's really be interesting as we use biosimilars. I don't think we have this sort of thing in Europe. It would be really nice if we had a huge database in Europe to look at what they've done so far. But in the US, as we use more and more of these, for example, I would bet that we could use the Flatiron database or something like it to look at the GCSF and GMCSF, because they've been around enough.
For a long time.
So is the biosimilar rituximab. I bet you could do that. And that would be really helpful as we go on, because then maybe in the next few years, we can then start looking at the biosimilar bevacizumab, the biosimilar trastuzumab, because there are going to be so many doses, there's going to be so much conversion in the next year or two that we're going to be able to have all that data in these big databases. No, I agree totally with the real-world evidence kind of way of doing it.
And also, Adam, if you look into the 21st Century Cures Act, I think FDA has taken some bold leaps of faith and steps in that space. So they are coming out with guidelines about using the real-world evidence in the changing the label, adding the label.
So exactly. Label expansion.
So that's great, because instead of waiting like 10 years for a phase 3 randomized clinical trial, if you bridge the evidence gap once you get the drug approved, to collect the real-world evidence data, disease registry, drug registries, claim data, or Flatiron-like data, it would be a tremendous help for society to get a quicker turnaround of the publications and get additional indications or maybe change the labels.
Right, no, I agree with you. I mean, I think that, we all want to do a randomized clinical trial. We love them, obviously. You need some randomized clinical trial data to even get approved as a biosimilar, because you've got to show certain things in a randomized study. It's pretty controlled. But short of that, I mean, I think that there are questions that can be answered fairly quickly from the real-world data as long as we trust it. I think that, and that is getting over that trust is going to be interesting. So speaking of trust, one thing we haven't talked about yet is the patient. Do you think the patients know or care about this?
In general, I think, if you look at, we have the same experience of dealing with patients. When you explain it to them that this has undergone extensive vetting, it's bioequivalent, it's biosimilar, there has been totality of evidence. I've had not a single patient who raised question about when we switch to biosimilars. We definitely explained it to them. Now, our population may be different. I'm not sure if I would have the same experience working in New York or somewhere in different more.
Well, Pittsburgh's a lot like South Carolina. I'd say the patients are right. Pittsburgh's very much like South Carolina, especially the rural areas. The rural areas surrounding Pittsburgh, 20 miles outside of town. But but I agree with you. But back to this. So I mean, so the patients, you explain to them, again, my issue and the theoretical issue that I think, it's a theoretical issue that I think a lot of people have, is patients are going to progress. They have metastatic cancer. They are going to progress, whether you're on a biosimilar or not. And the patients are going to be upset whether they're on a biosimilar or not. And the question is, and this is the question, I think the essential question of these drugs, and thankfully in Europe it hasn't happened to date, But the patient go to us, well, did I progress because you gave me the biosimilar, doctor? How are you going to handle that one?
I think for that, collecting real-world evidence may be quite helpful because we tell patients that, listen, we are monitoring you closely. We are not just kind of switching drug. We are proactively ensuring that concern that we have and you have are being addressed, and maybe a year from now we'll see that, there will be a number of people who progress, but it's not because of the drug, it's because the
you have the disease. It's your disease, correct.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The issue, patients kind of get it because they understand generics.
They do, yeah.
And you can, even though it's not quite the same thing, I think patients understand it as kind of a, a bio, it's like kind of, not quite a generic drug, but it's kind of a similar drug, has similar properties. I think patients kind of get that. But I'll tell you, there are patients, as you know, even with generic drugs, who say, I don't want the generic, I want the brand name. Please, doctor, write the brand name for me. You're always going to get that. And I think in my practice, probably 5% or less. I don't know about you. It's a small percentage of
very
patients.
Small. I think same is, 2 to 3% is what they expect us to be kind of sticking there. But another way we help them understand is that, look at the companies that are in biosimilar space. Amgen,
that's a very good point.
Pfizer,
Right.
Mylan. All these companies have been in space for a long time. They are some of the largest manufacturers. And Amgen, in that case, was actually the company that brought the first biologic pegfilgrastim. So that actually reassures them that if a manufacturer has been in a space long enough to have experience, they will be very comfortable understanding what we're trying to
help. Yeah, and the other thing to really talk about, we kind of briefly mentioned this a few times, but it is really important. I think that in the generic space, particularly generic paclitaxel. We had that shortage a few years ago of it. It was just terrible. And people are afraid of that too. And I think it's really important if any of the manufacturers happen to be listening to this, I don't know how many people are going to, but if you happen to be listening to this, it's really important to guarantee the supply.
And that's exactly
and that's a biggie. That's a huge one.
When we vet a partner that we want to buy drugs from, we want to make sure that they have a history of uninterrupted supply throughout the course of manufacturing.
Right. That's really big because we all remember what happened with paclitaxel. Literally, I had to go to nanoparticle paclitaxel in my patients. And the insurers were not too happy because it's more expensive. But on the other hand, I said, listen, I can't get paclitaxel. I can't get generic paclitaxel. What am I going to do? The patient needs it. Lung cancer, breast cancer.
Of course.
It's like the drug we use. It's a big drug. So anyway, but that's really interesting. So patients really, I think that's pretty good. Have you used? I know pharma, these big companies that are making biosimilars are coming up with, patient education materials. Do you think those are going to be useful for patients? Do they need them?
I think there may be some small number of patients that may need it, but in general, I think education is much more needed at provider level, probably at nurse level, because they are the one who deal with patients on day in and day out basis.
Right, so it's more of a nursing education.
Exactly, yeah.
So, so if you had the choice of docs, nurses, and patients, which would you pick first?
I'd pick doc first.
Oh, doc first, okay.
And then, because they are the people who are control the prescription.
Right, they have to write it. Okay, yeah,
but then
reasonable.
I think nurses probably more intense for the nurses, doc just to let them be familiar with that.
Got it.